Pop-ups. Okay. Sorry. My laptop likes to scream at me. So this one's going to go a bit further afield into some weird, sticky details that are a bit more tangential, but they're good to just handle. I'm going to try and handle them. There are a lot of people, especially in the manosphere, who have this really icky, distorted view of ethics and virtue. And there are a lot of women on TikTok giving advice about how women should date, and they don't have any basis in ethics or virtue. So the manosphere claims to be ethical and virtuous, and they're not, in really horrific ways. And then the TikTok advice ladies are just telling you how to be maximally exploitative for your own benefit without any mention of ethics at all. Both of them are horrible. So we're going to get into ethics and virtue. The first point I got to address with the manosphere is that modern American Christian fundamentalists don't get to claim that they invented virtue. It's not some Christian fundamentalist idea. Okay. The word virtue is derived from the Greek and Latin traditions, and their gods were really horrible people. They weren't pointing to their gods saying how wonderful their gods were to declare virtue. Virtu means like a man. So you don't need to refer to a deity to derive virtue. And the traditions of virtue and ethics go back very far in multiple cultures. I'm a Taoist, and the Taoist philosophy is referring to the peoples who were pre-agricultural. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu specifically says people long ago, before cities. So he's referring to the virtue ethics of the tribal societies, the hunter-gatherer nomads in the mountain valleys of northern China. Very, very old traditions of virtue and wisdom. So there's a couple different concepts that get tossed around that are really destructive. And I'm going to try and just address them. They're all kind of scattered. We're going to bounce around. The first one is promiscuity. The manosphere loves to hate on women for being promiscuous while trying to justify their own promiscuity. And the way they do this is by pointing to evolutionary psychologists, which is really a tell. Anytime that someone mentions evolutionary psychologists, alarm bells need to be ringing, because every single time that an evolutionary psychologist has made a claim about human nature, the anthropologists who study tribal societies, the archaeologists who look at the historical record in physical evidence, the people who actually know how people lived for hundreds of thousands of years, they say, no, that's not what we see. The evolutionary psychologists are consistently a group of privileged white men who are trying to justify the behaviors that they observe in Western society today by constructing a narrative that sounds good to their fans. And it never has matched the actual data we observe in tribal societies or archaeology. Every claim of the evolutionary psychologist has been debunked. So let's look at a few of the ideas in the manosphere that are really destructive and horrible and stupid. This idea that men are supposed to just seek as many sexual partners as possible because we're able to produce sperm and we don't have to care for the baby. As if in some distant past there was a guy just wandering around finding a woman, having sex with her, and then she's left with the baby, and then he wanders somewhere else and finds another woman and has sex with her, just leaves her with them. As if that was happening. But that never happened. We lived in a tribe where we had an oath on our life to serve the tribe. Which means if you broke that oath, if you were abusive or exploitative or selfish, we actually packed up and leave without you while you're sleeping. We put out the fire, we take all our stuff, you wake up, there's no fire, there's no stuff. we're all gone. And as soon as you're sick or injured, you die. And you can't keep a fire going while you go try and get food. And you don't know how to make all the tools yourself. So this idea that men were just running around being promiscuous doesn't match up with any of the data from tribal societies or archaeology. We look back in the historical record before agriculture, we do not see that behavior at all. In a tribe, you have at most about 150 people, which means in your age range that you're looking for potential partners, you only have like 8 to 12 potential matches at all. There's 8 to 12 people you might be with in your life. And you all know each other. You all have a shared commitment of collaboration. You're all working together every day to provide for everyone's needs and then taking your share from the common pool. And there's a group of elders watching you all the time, and you don't have privacy. There was no privacy. You had straw walls on a stick hut at best. You don't get away with abusive behavior. You don't get away with selfish behavior. You don't get away with exploiting people. In tribal societies, as soon as someone's abusive, if a man abuses a woman in a tribal society, usually what happens is all the women gather outside his dwelling and shout insults at him all day long until he realizes he will never have peace and he has to walk away into the wilderness to die alone, knowing that no one wants him. So if Fresh and Fit or whatever podcast, if you put them in a tribe, the tribe is going to let him die because they don't value his presence. That's reality. And in contrast, the same thing with exploitative, abusive behaviors that women tell other women in the dating world. To just sleep around with all the guys you meet until you find one who gives you what you like. In a tribe, you had 8 to 12 potential partners. And if you're just throwing them away and trying to get what you can out of them, you're going to find out pretty quick that none of the guys want to date you. Very quickly. You die childless. So both sides of the conversation are exploitative and transactional. They want to get away with being selfish, objectifying their partners, holding other people to a standard that they don't meet. That doesn't fly in a tribe. So we know humans didn't actually exist that way. And so getting deeper into this idea of promiscuity and faithfulness and things like that. The concept that the manosphere likes to expound upon repeatedly is that a man and a woman are supposed to marry for life and be forever faithful, and there's supposed to be no promiscuity. That was an idea created hundreds of years after Jesus by Augustine in the Catholic Church, and it was a practice of agricultural communities as a way to buy and sell land. And then you have pastoral communities where they just kept slaves. So those three different groups all expounded upon this idea of avoiding promiscuity. And for pastoral societies where they bought and sold humans as if they were animals, it was to maintain their market value. In agricultural societies where girls were kept virginal until they were forced to marry some other guy, her hymen was the blood signature on the contract for a piece of land. And it's only been a few thousand years that we've had that horror going on. Okay? It's not the 300,000 years of human tribal existence. And then Augustine and the Catholics declared specifically that the material world is bad. And so you're not supposed to experience any pleasure. Augustine decided that if you taste something you enjoy, you shouldn't. If you look at something you enjoy, you shouldn't. You listen to something you enjoy, you shouldn't. All material sense is bad, and you should avoid all pleasure. And they were doing that to inculcate a feeling of guilt and shame. And we know that inculcation of guilt and shame for things that aren't actually abusive of others, you're not actually abusing anyone, that's done by cults. So Augustine taught the Catholic Church cult indoctrination tactics. methods of controlling people with a fear of being wrong and bad when they hadn't actually been abusive. So I recommend the Jefferson Bible, which is just the words and actions of Jesus. That's a good lesson. But if you start adding Augustine on top, he was a thief. He was a horrible person for his whole life, and then he decided that you all need to be perfect, which is really gross. Flowery words, cult indoctrination tactics. So in tribal societies, what we see is people are not married for life. They're married for 10 to 25 years. And then they'll marry someone else. And being married and then separating and being with someone else isn't some horrible thing for them, because their oath, their commitment, and their bond is to the whole tribe. And so when they separate from a marriage, the elders are going to insist that they resolve their conflicts, that they separate peaceably. They're not holding a grudge. They're not getting away with abuse. They're not exploiting each other. Because you have to keep the whole tribe together. And tribal societies, you will see lots of guys will have 2 wives at the same time. And there are some women who will have 5 husbands at the same time. There tends to be a different pace of skew, but they all shuffle around. And the tribal societies will insist that you do get married to someone at a relatively young age. And they don't tie it to sexuality the way that farm communities do. For a farm community, it was about guaranteeing that the children of that woman were directly biologically related to the husband, so that the kids could inherit the farmland. That was why you needed to avoid promiscuity. Tribes don't have that problem. So the tribal societies, they say you need to form a deep empathic relationship with one person. That's what a marriage is, a deep empathic relation. So asexual people, you can be married and form a deep empathic relation, and a tribe is not upset about whether or not you're getting it on. The empathic relation you form with that one person is the place where you're practicing an empathic bond. You're learning how to be empathic and work together. And so that's how you learn to do that with the whole tribe. You learn to be empathic, compassionate, working together collaboratively for the whole tribe. For them all to benefit from your presence in the tribe, you need to learn how to do that with one person first. It's already hard enough with just 2 people. Learn to do that first, and then we see as a tribe that you are good at doing that in general. So marriage was a vehicle for developing your ability to be empathic and collaborative. That's the point. They don't tie marriage to sexuality. So if you're being sexual with someone else that you're not in an empathic bond with, that's fine, as long as you're honest and compassionate. And that's not too hard, because if you're not compassionate, we're going to get rid of you. And there's no way to have something secret going on, because you have no privacy. So the modern obsession with simplistic narratives in the manosphere is to say that men want to marry the virgin and they're lusting after the 304. That's Augustinian. That grew out of Roman era city dynamics. And it's not at all how tribes behave. And it's not at all how the early agricultural societies behaved either. Early agricultural societies were overwhelmingly matriarchal and matrilineal. You've got the early Egyptian kingdoms before they were united. They were matrilineal. The Minoan civilization that invented indoor plumbing 2,000 years before Romans copied them, they were led by matriarchy. The early Babylonians before Gilgamesh were led by the high priestesses of Inanna. And Inanna is a great example. The Greeks, after Alexander invaded, they called Inanna the 304 of Babylon. She wasn't. The Temple of Inanna held the highest place in a multifaceted architecture of authority. There were the clan elder councils who would help resolve disputes between groups. There were the merchant guilds who managed trade. And there was the Temple of Inanna, who kind of oversaw all of society. And these women were collecting money at their temple for a variety of services. They were producing medicinal tinctures or herbal medicines. They were providing business loans to people and collecting interest. And they also performed. They had dances and other activities. Men would come by and pay for the service, and that money went into the temple. And that was a group of women who were running their own business together. All of them were living together. None of them had to marry. They all raised their kids together. The elder women were grandmothers who were helping manage the whole operation. And they were able to accumulate so much wealth intergenerationally that they were the regional bank. And they were the center of society. So their form of promiscuity was very different from what is advised by the women who are telling women how to date. The Inanna form of promiscuity is empowering. But when women tell other women to get free dinner, that's actually disempowering. Because she cannot pay rent with leftovers from a fancy restaurant. And so she stays dependent on wealthy men. That's not empowering. My great-grandma was working the docks in Seattle, and she was a lot smarter than these women about how to make a career and build up real wealth, durable lifetime wealth from her activities. So learning how to be like Inanna is a much better lesson about sexual empowerment and sexual liberation than what the women talking to women about dating are saying. And promiscuity is not a strike against someone, because it's not about how many other people have touched you. So the manosphere has this horrible idea that somehow if a lot of different people have touched you, that somehow you're not able to form a healthy relationship, which is completely backwards. I guarantee that those manosphere guys will have a much harder time pair bonding. That's their favorite phrase. Pair bonding with a woman who spent 15 years in a deeply loving relationship with a man who was they were getting it on many times a day. Just one dude in her life, and they were deeply in love. She's going to have a harder time bonding with that random bro than a woman who was getting a lot of different people in her life. So the manosphere has this insane idea about promiscuity. It doesn't even make sense. And the concept that both sides fail to recognize, neither of them include, is that it's not about your body count. It's not about your promiscuity. It's about how you're relating to your partners. So I only enter into a relationship when I hope to relate to the person. That's why it's called a relationship. It's because the purpose is so that I have the chance, the opportunity to relate to a whole person, their deepest self. That's emotional intimacy. You're not getting any kind of intimacy if you're hooking up with a stranger. That's not intimacy. So I see my opportunity to empathize as the biggest opportunity in a relationship. It's my chance to feel what they're going through and to understand on the deepest level who they are and appreciate them for themselves. And you don't see that happening in the manosphere. They're not trying to empathize with their partner. And you don't see that in the women advising women on TikTok. They're not trying to relate to their partner either. Neither of them are seeking a relationship as an opportunity for them to relate to someone else. It's been removed from the conversation. So if there was someone who was only in a few relationships or even zero, but they never empathized, they never actually cared and felt what the other person was feeling, that's a heart rate of 0. We're not talking about body counts, heart rate. What percentage of the time were you empathic? And if someone else was being promiscuous, if they were involved with many people, but they were consistently empathizing with all of them, seeking to empathize as an opportunity, that's an experienced lover. And you won't hear that on either side of the conversation. So it's important to recognize that if you are practicing a certain style of behavior, you are wearing in that habit. My earlier videos talked about Hebbian learning and habit formation and how you wire your brain. Your synapses actually wire together for certain habits. So if you're constantly just seeking who's going to give you pleasure, both sides are just looking for that, then that's what relationships become about for you. And you don't get rid of that until you actually break the bonds in your synapses by using cognitive behavioral therapy. You will keep observing your partner as an object for your own pleasure until you make the effort that takes many months of real diligent practice to undo that damage. And that's going to put you on a lower level of desirability in the dating market compared to anyone who's actually seeking to empathize. Someone who wants to be in an empathic, emotionally intimate relationship isn't going to seek you first. Because you're not just bringing trauma baggage, you're bringing an abusive burden that you haven't handled. So there's also that same problem with empathy being an opportunity versus being a burden. So the manosphere and the TikTok dating advice girls both view empathy as a burden. You'll hear this a lot about men complaining that women are too emotional and want to talk about their feelings, and guys shouldn't. Guys should be unemotional. That's ridiculous. That's inhuman. And then this idea that women are burdened by men sharing their feelings, that he should just go to a therapist. If you don't want to relate to your partner's feelings, why are you in a relationship? Why would you want to be with someone if you don't want to relate to their feelings? And if you do go to a therapist, they are trained to not empathize with you. They listen to you sharing your feelings, you vent, but they are trained to not empathize. And they don't share their own emotional state. They don't share their own life history. So that it's not a mutual empathic bond. You just vent to a wall that takes notes and you feed it a check. So someone unburdening their soul to a therapist is not building emotional intimacy. They're not building mutual empathy. And someone dating who says that they shouldn't have to empathize with their partner because that's a burden to them is admitting that they don't want to relate to the person they say they love. That's really gross. That's a really gross way to be. There were some other tangents there. There's lots of tangents. I'll probably break it up because I'm already getting long. There will be more videos after this.